It was a night that felt like any other corporate gathering. The soft hum of conversation filled the room, mingling with the occasional burst of laughter and clinking of glasses. People dressed in sharp suits, their polished shoes clicking on the marble floors, exchanged polite pleasantries as they navigated the sea of guests. Adam stood at the edge of the room, watching it all unfold, his fingers nervously tapping against his drink. The weight of the night was heavy on his shoulders, but he knew better than to let it show. After all, appearances were everything in these circles. Adam had never been good at pretending to fit in. Sure, he could talk business, hold a conversation, even smile when necessary. But deep down, he knew he was a far cry from the people who thrived in this environment. His world was different, gritty, raw, filled with the everyday struggles of being a single dad. His life wasn't glamorous or polished. It was real, messy, and complicated. But tonight he had to show up. For Lily, she deserved more than the bare minimum. And this event, this opportunity, was the closest he would ever come to something that could give them both a better life. The CEO of the company, Laura Montgomery, stood across the room, holding court as usual. Her presence commanded attention, and her flawless poise made her seem untouchable. Adam had seen her before, of course. She was the kind of woman who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. People gravitated toward her, eager to bask in the aura of her power and success. But there was something about her that made Adam uneasy, something he couldn't quite place. It was then that their eyes met. For a brief moment, the world around them seemed to slow down. He could see her scanning the room, her gaze settling on him. And then, with the subtlety of a predator locking onto its prey, she began to walk toward him. He couldn't help but feel a lump form in his throat. Why was she coming over to him? Was it the way he looked? The way he stood out from the crowd, the lone figure in a sea of suits? Or was it just a casual encounter, nothing more than a passing exchange? When she reached him, there was a smile on her lips, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a smile that spoke of experience, of someone who had seen it all and wasn't easily impressed. "Is my age a problem?" she asked, her voice smooth, with just a hint of curiosity. Adam blinked, thrown off guard. The question felt like it came out of nowhere. He hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Was this some kind of test? Was she asking if he thought she was too old to lead the company? Too old to be at the top of the corporate ladder? Or was she making a comment on his own age, wondering if he thought someone like her should be involved with someone like him? His mind raced, but before he could gather his thoughts, the words tumbled out. "Age?" he repeated, his voice low and unsure. "Age isn't the problem, but being judged for it is." Her smile faltered for a brief moment, as though she hadn't expected that response. Adam could see the flicker of something in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or maybe annoyance. It was hard to tell. But he didn't care. He wasn't here to play her games. He wasn't sure what prompted him to walk away then. Maybe it was the way she made him feel small, insignificant, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit into the grand design of the evening. Or maybe it was the instinct to protect himself, to guard the fragile walls he had built around his life. But he turned his back on her and stepped away, disappearing into the crowd. But as the night wore on, the weight of the interaction lingered in his mind. The question kept circling, an echo that wouldn't leave. Is my age a problem? It was a simple question, but there was so much more beneath the surface. What did she mean? And why had he felt so off balance, so exposed in that moment? Adam found a quiet corner to collect his thoughts. The buzz of conversation and clinking of glasses became background noise as he replayed the moment over and over again in his mind. He had seen this side of her before, calm, composed, always in control. She was a woman who had risen to the top in a world dominated by men. She didn't apologize for her power, and she never showed weakness. But that night, in that brief exchange, he had seen something else. Something vulnerable. But why? Why had she asked that question? Was it insecurity that drove her to seek validation? To wonder if others saw her as just another woman trying to hold on to power? Or was there something deeper, something that no one else could see? His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking his train of thought. It was a text from Lily's school, a reminder for the upcoming parent-teacher meeting. Adam sighed, running a hand over his face. Lily, she was the only thing that truly mattered to him. The only thing worth fighting for. And as much as he wanted to escape the polished world of corporate life, he knew he had to stay in the game for her, for their future. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Lara didn't approach him again, but her question echoed in his mind, growing louder with each passing hour. By the time he left the event, he felt as though something had shifted, not just in the company or in the world of high-powered executives, but in himself. As the days went by, Adam couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change. He had been living in the shadows, constantly battling to keep his head above water. But Lara's question, her words, had sparked something in him. A realization that maybe, just maybe, he was worth more than the life he had settled for. Maybe it was time to take control of his own destiny. It wasn't long before he heard from her again. The offer came an opportunity he couldn't ignore. It was everything he had ever wanted, a chance to move up in the company, to secure his future and Lily's, but it wasn't just a simple promotion. There was a catch, something Lara wasn't saying outright. The email was clear, but cryptic. She wanted to meet him, discuss an opportunity that would change everything. And so, Adam found himself back at her office a few days later, sitting across from her as she spoke in that calm, measured tone of hers. "Adam," Lara said, her eyes never leaving his, "I've been impressed by your work. You've got potential. But let's be honest, you're not exactly a fit for the corporate world, are you? Your life? It's complicated." He didn't flinch. "It is," he said quietly. "But that's not a weakness." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp. "It's not, but it is an obstacle, and obstacles can be overcome. With the right offer, the right connections, you could have everything you've been working for." Adam's heart raced as she continued. The offer was tempting, but there was something in the way she spoke, in the way she watched him, that made him uneasy. It wasn't just about business. It was about control, power. Her offer wasn't just about him advancing in the company, it was about him doing things her way, bending the rules, playing her game. But Adam wasn't like the others. He wasn't willing to sacrifice his values, his integrity, just to climb a ladder. And yet the pressure was immense. His life had always been a fight one. He didn't always win, but Lily needed him. She depended on him, and this job, this opportunity, could make everything better. But at what cost? He left her office with more questions than answers. The weight of the decision pressing down on him, threatening to suffocate him. And as he stepped out into the cold night air, he knew he couldn't just let it go. He had to make a choice. But the game was just beginning. The days that followed the meeting with Lara felt like a blur to Adam. He couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the conversation, dissecting every word, every pause, every fleeting glance. Was it really a choice? Or was he being manipulated into making decisions he hadn't planned to? She had been so convincing, so confident in her offer, but something about it didn't sit right with him. Sitting in his small apartment, he could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner, a constant reminder of the life he was trying so hard to hold together. The warmth of the room contrasted with the coldness that had settled in his chest. Adam had always prided himself on his ability to stay grounded. But now the weight of Lara's words, the implications of her offer, threatened to drown him. His gaze drifted to the framed photo on the wall, the one of him and Lily, taken years ago at a park. She was so small, so full of joy, her face bright with happiness. And Adam, looking at the picture, could almost hear the laughter from that day, the carefree moments before the world had become so complicated. Before life had become a series of impossible decisions, each one carrying the weight of consequence. He had always promised himself that he would do whatever it took for Lily. But now, sitting there in the silence, Adam wasn't sure what whatever it took meant anymore. Was he willing to sacrifice his values for the life he wanted to give her? Was he willing to sacrifice who he was for a chance at success? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a soft knock on the door. Adam stood up, his legs stiff from sitting for too long. He opened it to find his daughter Lily standing there, her small frame holding a piece of paper in her hand. She smiled up at him, her bright eyes reflecting a mixture of innocence and trust. "Dad," she said, handing him the paper. "My teacher gave me this today." Adam took the paper and glanced at it. It was a simple drawing she had made at school of the two of them at the park. He smiled, his heart swelling with love. It was moments like this that made everything else seem insignificant. His daughter's happiness, her well-being, these were the things that mattered most to him. But even as he held the drawing, a part of him felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him again. Lily looked up at him, her expression shifting from excitement to concern. "Dad, is something wrong? You look sad?" He knelt down to her level, offering a warm smile that he hoped would ease her worries. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a lot on my mind." Lily didn't seem convinced, but she hugged him anyway, a small gesture that made Adam's chest tighten. She trusted him completely. And that trust was something he couldn't take for granted. As he watched her walk back to her room, Adam's mind returned to the situation with Lara, the offer, the manipulation. It all felt like a betrayal. The people he had trusted, the people who had promised him a future, had used him. They had pushed him to the edge, knowing full well that he was desperate, that he would do anything to provide for Lily, but they hadn't cared about him, about his struggles. They only cared about using him to further their own ambitions. His thoughts turned to his past, to the promises he had made to himself long before this all started. He remembered the early days when he had first become a father, when everything seemed possible. He had dreamed of a better life for Lily, of being the kind of father who could provide for her in ways his own father had never been able to. But as time had passed, those dreams had started to feel more like distant memories, fading with each passing day. Life had a way of knocking you down, of crushing your hopes until all that was left was survival. Adam's trust in people had always been cautious. He had learned the hard way that loyalty was a rare commodity. He had given his all to the company, to his colleagues, to his friends. But in the end, it always seemed to be the same. People took what they could, and when they were done, they moved on, leaving you with nothing but the wreckage of broken promises. As the days passed, the reality of his situation began to set in. The deeper he thought about Lara's offer, the more he realized how little it had to do with his abilities and everything to do with what she could make him do. She had promised him a better life, but only if he played by her rules. And her rules were simple: betray your own values, destroy the people who stood in your way, and take whatever you could. The betrayal wasn't just in her offer, it was in the way she had preyed on his weaknesses, using his desperation to manipulate him into making a choice that went against everything he had ever believed in. And the worst part, he had been willing to consider it. He had been willing to compromise his morals for the chance at a better life for Lily. Adam's emotions swung like a pendulum, first disbelief, then anger. The rage he felt toward Lara, toward the system that had forced him into this corner, began to consume him. It was a slow burn, a quiet fury that simmered just beneath the surface. But as the days went on, that anger shifted into something darker sorrow. He was mourning the man he had once been, the man who had fought for what was right, who had believed in doing things the right way. He had let that man slip away in exchange for a chance at success, and now he was paying the price. Every time he closed his eyes, he could hear Lara's voice, her words echoing in his mind. Age isn't the problem, but being judged for it is. Was that really it? Was she just playing him for a fool, making him feel as though he didn't belong, didn't deserve to be in her world? Or was it something deeper, something more insidious? The more Adam thought about it, the more he realized the extent of the manipulation. Lara had been using him all along, making him feel special, making him feel as though he had earned the promotion, that it was his for the taking. But in reality, it had all been part of a larger plan. She had been grooming him, preparing him for the moment when she could demand something from him in exchange for the power she had promised. She wasn't offering him a future, she was offering him a trap. It was at that moment that Adam made a decision. He couldn't let this slide, he couldn't let Lara win. The stakes were too high, not just for him, but for Lily. He couldn't let his daughter grow up in a world where loyalty and integrity meant nothing. He couldn't let her believe that the only way to succeed was by sacrificing everything that made you human. But even as he formulated a plan, a part of him hesitated. Was this the right thing to do? Could he live with the consequences? He knew that the path ahead would not be easy. But as he looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully in her room, he knew that there was no turning back. The first stirrings of revenge began to take shape in his mind. But it wasn't just about punishing Lara, it was about reclaiming his own life, his own sense of dignity. It was about showing her that she couldn't break him, that he would not be her pawn. He would make her pay for the betrayal, for the lies, for the manipulation. But as Adam sat in the silence of his apartment, a heavy heart weighing on him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this would come at a cost. Revenge never came without sacrifice. The question was, how much was he willing to lose to make her feel the same pain she had caused him? The answer was clear: everything.
The weight of the decision was suffocating. Adam sat in his small apartment, the dim light from the desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. His fingers were intertwined tightly, his knuckles white with the pressure, as though he could squeeze away the turmoil inside him. His mind felt like a battlefield, thoughts crashing against each other like waves on a rocky shore. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lara's face. The confident smile, the cold, calculating way she had manipulated him into thinking he had earned the promotion. That her offer was the key to a better life for him and Lily. And yet, as the days passed, that smile had started to feel more like a mask, hiding the darkness behind it. The truth was becoming undeniable. She wasn't offering him a future, she was offering him a trap that would cost him everything. It wasn't just the betrayal of the offer itself, it was everything that had come before, the way she had used his vulnerabilities against him, playing on his insecurities and his desire to provide for Lily, the way she had made him feel as though his worth was defined by his obedience to her demands. Every promise, every compliment, every ounce of trust he had placed in her had been carefully constructed to lead him here. To this moment of realization, the betrayal ran deep. It wasn't just a simple misstep, it was the unraveling of everything he had believed in. The trust he had placed in his colleagues, in his mentors, in the company he had worked so tirelessly for. They had all used him, just like Lara. They had promised him a future, but all they had offered was an illusion. And the worst part was that Adam had been blind to it. He had been so desperate for something better, something more, that he had ignored the signs, ignored the whispers that told him he was being taken for a fool. The room seemed to grow smaller as the weight of it all pressed down on him. He could almost hear the echoes of his past, the promises made to Lily when she was just a little girl, the dreams he had shared with her. I remembered the day she had been born, how everything had seemed so simple then. There had been no games to play, no manipulation to navigate. Just him and her, a father and his daughter, trying to make their way in a world that was never kind to them. But as time passed, things had changed. Adam had changed. The innocence of those early years had been replaced by the harsh realities of adulthood. He had done things he wasn't proud of, made compromises that still haunted him. But he had always told himself that it was for Lily, that it was worth it if it meant giving her a better life. But now, as he sat in the darkness of his apartment, he couldn't escape the crushing sense of betrayal. He had trusted Lara, trusted the people who had promised him success, promised him a way out. And now, the weight of their deceit was a constant presence in his life. Lurking in the corners of his mind, twisting every thought and every memory. The anger he felt was like a slow burn, simmering just beneath the surface. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms as his thoughts turned darker. How could he have been so blind? How could he have trusted her, trusted them? The rage built up inside him, hot and consuming, until it felt like he couldn't breathe. He wanted to lash out, to make them feel the same pain he felt. But there was something else, something quieter, something more insidious, the sorrow. It was the sorrow that weighed on him the most. The sorrow that he had been deceived by those he had trusted. The sorrow that came from the realization that everything he had worked for had been nothing more than a means to an end for people like Lara. She hadn't cared about him, about his struggles, about his life. She had only cared about using him to climb higher, to secure her own position of power. And now, that power had come at the expense of everything Adam had worked for. His thoughts turned to Lily again. Her face, so full of hope and trust, haunted him. How could he explain this to her? How could he look her in the eye and tell her that he had let himself be used? That he had let his desperation for a better life cloud his judgment? But even as the sorrow threatened to drown him, a new emotion began to take root. A quiet determination. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be, not for him. It's not for Lily. He had been down before, knocked down by the world, by the people who had used him. But he had always gotten back up. And now he would do it again. His mind started to work again, slowly but surely. The plan, the revenge. It wasn't about the job anymore. It wasn't about the promotion. It was about something more, something personal. Lara had taken something from him. She had taken his trust, his dignity, and he would make her pay for it. He knew that revenge wasn't a clean thing. It wasn't something that could be neatly packaged and delivered. It would be messy. It would cost him. But it was the only way to reclaim his life, to reclaim the power he had lost. And maybe, just maybe, it was the only way to make Lara understand that she couldn't get away with what she had done. The next day, Adam began his investigation. He was careful, meticulous. He had learned a lot in his time working at the company. He knew how to read between the lines, how to find the cracks in the facade that people like Lara tried so hard to hide. And there were cracks. There were always cracks. It didn't take long for him to uncover something that would turn the tide in his favor. A deal. A secret deal that Lara had made years ago. A deal that had been buried in layers of bureaucracy and legal jargon. A deal that had been designed to profit off the backs of people she had promised to help. People who had trusted her. People like him. Adam's heart pounded as he pieced the puzzle together. The betrayal ran deeper than he had ever imagined. It wasn't just Lara who had deceived him. It was the entire system. The company had built its empire on lies, on exploiting people like Adam for their own gain. And now, Adam had the proof. He had the ammunition. But even as the plan took shape, a part of him hesitated. Was he doing the right thing? Was revenge really the answer? Could he live with the consequences of his actions? The doubts lingered, but they were drowned out by the quiet voice in his head, the voice that reminded him of everything he had lost. The voice that told him that this was the only way to make things right. He had to do it. For Lily, for himself. The day came when Adam put the plan into action. He had everything in place, the evidence, the strategy, the leverage. And he knew exactly how he would bring Lara to her knees. It was no longer the man she had manipulated. He was the man who would make her pay for every lie, every betrayal. As he stood in front of his computer, staring at the email he was about to send, his heart raced. This was it. It was the moment when everything would change. He wasn't just reclaiming his career, he was reclaiming his life. And as he clicked the send button, a wave of satisfaction washed over him. The first step had been taken. But deep down, Adam knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long, and the consequences would be heavy. But he was ready to face whatever came next. Ready to make Lara understand that betrayal had its price. As the email sent, a quiet resolve settled over him. The plan had begun. And there was no turning back.
Adam stood by the window, the city lights flickering below him, distant and indifferent, like the life he had been living for the past few years. The cool night air pressed against the glass, but the warmth in the room seemed to suffocate him. His thoughts raced in a haze of anger, confusion, and loss. The plan he had set in motion was no longer just a reaction to Lara's betrayal. It had become something more, something darker. His mind wandered back to the moment he had decided to take action. That quiet, intense moment when the realization hit him that he had been played, used by people he had trusted, by the system he had believed in. And now, here he was, standing at the precipice of a decision that would change everything. A decision that would either free him or destroy him. He closed his eyes and the memories flooded back, each one sharper than the last. The feeling of betrayal was fresh, like a wound that had barely begun to heal. He remembered the way Lara had smiled at him, how she had played on his desperation, his hunger for success. It wasn't just the manipulation that cut deep, it was the way she had made him believe he was in control, that he was choosing this path of his own accord. But the truth was undeniable now. He had been nothing more than a pawn in her game. She had promised him a better life, but all she had given him was an illusion. And the worst part was that he had allowed it to happen. He had allowed himself to be blinded by his own desires, his need to prove something to himself and to Lily. The weight of the betrayal was unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the guilt that gnawed at him. the guilt of feeling complicit in his own deception. How had he let himself get here? How had he let someone like Lara manipulate him so easily? Adam's eyes flickered open, and he found himself staring at the photo of Lily on his desk. She was smiling in the picture, her innocent face a sharp contrast to the storm raging inside him. He had promised her that things would get better, that they would have a future. But now, standing at the crossroads, Adam wondered if the cost of that future was worth the price he was about to pay. He thought back to the early days, the days when he first became a father. He remembered how much hope he had carried in his heart back then, how simple life had seemed. There had been no manipulations, no corporate games. Just him, Lily, and the belief that they could build a life together, without the weight of the world bearing down on them. But as time went on, things had changed. His dreams of a better life had become clouded by the harsh reality of the world. The weight of providing for Lily, of making sure she had everything she needed, became a constant pressure. The job he had taken, the company he had trusted, all of it had promised him a way out. But all it had done was trap him in a cycle of broken promises and betrayal. As the nights passed, Adam's mind began to race even more wildly. The plan to expose Lara was taking shape, but the more he thought about it, the more it felt like he was stepping into a trap of his own making. Was he any better than she was? Was he becoming the very thing he despised, someone willing to betray others to get what he wanted? There were moments when the answer was clear. Lara had to be exposed, had to be held accountable for the lies she had spun. She had deceived him, had used him to further her own agenda, and now it was his turn to make her face the consequences. But in the quiet moments when he was alone with his thoughts, Adam couldn't help but wonder if the revenge he was planning was worth the price he was going to pay. He looked at the city below, the lights stretching out into the horizon. The city that had promised him success, that had promised him a future for Lily, was now just a backdrop to the chaos in his mind. The life he had built, the trust he had placed in the people who had shaped his career, felt like it was all slipping through his fingers. Everything was unraveling, and there was no way to stop it. Adam's phone buzzed on the table, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Lara. "I need to see you, now." His heart skipped a beat. There was something cold and calculating in her words, something that made his stomach twist. He had been expecting this. The pressure was mounting, and he knew she wasn't going to let him walk away easily. But this time it would be different. This time he was the one in control. He stood up, the decision clear in his mind. He would meet her, but it would be on his terms. He wasn't going to be manipulated anymore. He wasn't going to be her pawn. He would make her understand the cost of the game she had been playing. As Adam drove to the meeting, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, each one pulling him in a different direction. Part of him wanted to run away, to leave it all behind and start fresh with Lily, but another part of him, one that had been buried beneath layers of doubt and fear, knew that this was the only way forward. He had to confront her. He had to make her pay for what she had done. The office building loomed ahead, cold and imposing, a symbol of the world that had betrayed him. He parked the car and took a deep breath before stepping out. His heart was pounding, but there was a clarity now, a sharp focus that had been missing before. He knew what he had to do. The elevator ride felt like an eternity, each second stretching out longer than the last. When the doors finally opened, Adam stepped out into the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He approached Lara's office with a sense of purpose, his mind fully committed to the plan he had set in motion. Lara was standing by the window when he entered, her back to him, her silhouette outlined by the city lights. She didn't turn when he stepped inside, but he could feel her eyes on him, even though she hadn't looked. The tension in the room was palpable, thick with unspoken words and unfinished business. "So, you finally decided to come," she said, her voice cool and collected. "I knew you wouldn't just walk away." Adam didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, letting the silence stretch between them. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the anger, the sorrow hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. "I'm done playing your game, Lara," he said, his voice low but firm. "You've taken everything from me, my trust, my dignity, and now it's time to pay the price." Lara turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You think you can bring me down?" she asked, her voice tinged with amusement. You think you have what it takes? I have the truth, Adam said, his voice growing stronger. And that's all I need. There was a brief flicker of surprise in her eyes, but it quickly faded. She smiled, a cold, calculating smile that made Adam's stomach twist. You're making a mistake, Adam. You can't win this. You think you're in control, but you're just another pawn in my game? For a moment, Adam stood frozen, the weight of her words crashing over him. She was right, she had always been in control. But this time, things were different. This time, it was his turn to make the rules. I'm not a pawn anymore, Adam said, his voice steady. And neither are you. Laura's smile faltered for a moment, just a flicker of doubt, but it was enough. Adam had struck a nerve. He could feel it, the power was shifting. I'm done, he said, turning to leave. But as he reached the door, he paused and looked back at her. The game is over. And with that, he walked out of the room, leaving Laura behind in the silence of her own making. As Adam stepped into the elevator, the weight that had been pressing on him for so long finally lifted. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back now. He had taken the first step toward revenge, but it wasn't just about the payback anymore. It was about reclaiming his life, his dignity, and the future he had almost lost. But as the elevator doors closed, Adam couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long, and the consequences would be heavy, but he was ready. Ready to face whatever came next. Ready to make Laura understand that betrayal had its price.